Welcome. This is a video without script. It's about the haplogroup R. That means starting with the root R1, and then its sub-haplogroups, its descendants R1A. R1A. There probably was R1A all over here, but after R1A came R1B, and R1B dominates Western Europe, Iceland, and also around the Yenisei River, or behind. Behind means more east. So differently than the haplogroup R in Africa, which is very local, which is surprisingly for our supposed ancestor, here where the pointer is, B was more or less here, even more locally than A, not to mention A00 and A0 that don't even occupy a region. So what occupies in Africa, our supposed ancestor, is A here in a very arid region. It's people with quite small stature, differently than the haplogroup R, and the same as for B, they have small statures too, and I interpret A being in an arid zones as that they had to hide where others would not follow, very arid. And the same for B, they had to hide where others would not follow, in that case in very dense forest, very humid, of course with a lot of biodiversity, and A nor B is apt to develop cultures, the places where they retracted into. So they retracted. You would not expect that for our ancestor that will populate all of the world. So R is different. Here its root, R1 is the root. That is of importance for us. R2 we leave out of this video for now. It's only very local. So what for us, what represents R, the root, is R1. It's here in this region in North America, and it gives rise to the descendants that I just mentioned, R1A and R1B, R1B, R1B. But this is a different R1B than this R1B, and I explained that this R1B comes through the North Atlantic Gyre, and this one comes through the South Atlantic Gyre. The same way I will explain later R2. It comes from the South Pacific Gyre through the South Pacific Gyre. And R doesn't follow a traditional route to the east because it's already very densely populated with let's say a hybrid just before R. So I show you quickly. This is more or less Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. and this is where A retires to, withdraws to, and it's the Khoisan. It's people, ancient people, the most ancient of Africa, but with small statues. And this is B, and as you see it's pygmy and Hadza, and it's also small statues, especially when you compare to R, that has its roots in North America. So this is dense forest, very humid, no place convenient for cultures, and this is very arid, no place convenient for cultures, so they redraw in those places. The Africans, the first Africans, the most native Africans. And then when it comes to Adam, Y-DNA Adam, it's supposedly A00 and A0, and they don't even have a region. It's only cases. When you compare this with Q, then you see that Q is very present all over the world. South America 60 to 100%, while A and B in Africa, on their non-convenient places, very arid, very forested, not convenient for cultures. So the Americans in general more convenient for cultures, except a few deserts, and permafrost. So 60 to 100%. Those A and B in Africa were only 40 to 50% and occupy only retracted in only 10% with very low population densities. And here it's 60 to 100%, it's much more, and it's the whole of South America, which is smaller than Africa but much bigger than the areas occupied by A and B. And North America is almost as big as the whole of Africa. As you see, Q was present in almost all of Eastern Eurasia, or in Asia, and in the Middle East. And later I will explain that it was substituted, because it's a very old group, it was substituted here by R, that I showed you in the beginning, and here it's substituted by mostly by E, not by A or B as we would expect, because A and B, especially A, is our ancestor of all modern humans, supposedly. So Q, present in very large area, contrary to A, and even more to B, that are present very locally in very low in regions populated with very low densities. Quickly resuming, this is Q and this is A. A, the biggest area is here in Southwest Africa, very arid, desert-like, and here is a desert-like region because it's close to the Sahara. So to make it easy, A is here, retracted to survive. So this is what is left of the most native Africans here. When you see Q, that's supposedly the latest, it is still present over mostly of the world. It's present in Europe as well. As you see, there's a low presence still in Africa. It was probably much more general. Okay, so that is a strange fact for the latest, and this very limited presence is a strange fact for our supposed ancestor. This is a world map that shows all dominant haplogroups, and again you see that Q, purple, dominates large part of the Americas, which together are much bigger than Africa, especially much bigger than the area that A occupies, which is less than 10% of the area that Q occupies. C is a descendant from Q, so if you join them, then Q has a much bigger extension, and then you see that Q is next to C, Q is next to C, Q is next to C. So Q and C, this is also C, Australia, occupy an important part of the world. I would say except Africa, except Western Europe, maybe except Western EURASIA, and except in the East, Indonesia, and South Asia. So, but that's still both Americas, important part of Asia or Eastern Eurasia, and Australia. So this is a world map that represents the real area of each continent. So you see that North America comes quite close to Africa and is bigger than South America, but these three continents together are much bigger than the area occupied by A, which is an area with very low population density and people with low stature. So if you add up C, which is a descendant of Q, and with D, which is a descendant of Q, then Q, C and D together occupy an important part of the world. R is a descendant of Q as well, so it adds to the dominance of Q, and its oldest descendants. R is not an old descendant of Q, is a recent descendant of Q. You can see that there is an association between R and the Younger Dryas boundary, which is still in another place, I think. Okay, well, this is as well the Younger Dryas boundary, but here it's easier to see. Younger Dryas boundary associated with R, and later I will explain that the Younger Dryas boundary is formed or made by haplogroup R, and that around 12,800 years BP. You can see that R1A and R1B descend from R1, here R1, here R1A and R1B, etc. David Reich, David Reich, Origins of Humans and Culture. This is chapter Zoom into Britain, Zoom into Britain, and then you can see that the former haplogroups were I and I2, and they are turned over roughly between 4,000 and 4,500 by the red dot, which is R1B, which I showed you in the map before. Something similar happens in Iberia, where red R1B overturns blue, which is again I and I2, but in this case also H and G2. So this map here, this is associated with R, and this is an older migration. This is an older migration. This is haplogroup O. It's kind of a counterpart of R that occupies, invades, turns over Western Europe and Western Eurasia. And O does pretty much the same, at least in recent times, in Asia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Madagascar. You can imagine R more or less like in this picture. Bronze Age is the era of R and probably of O, and this is one example. It's Sintashta, but it's R. It's between Russia and Kazakhstan, and so as I said, it's related to R, but this could as well represent O, because I see some Asian features, but they are very advanced, much more advanced than haplogroup A or B in Africa, which are in regions that don't even have a chance to develop that much. But they have chariots, they use metals for the horses also to protect them, warfare. They are experts in metallurgy, and as said, they come, in the case of haplogroup R, they come from their root, and their root is in North America, and or their root comes from Q. That will be proven later in these videos. So this is also a counterpart of R and of O, is haplogroup E, and differently than R and O, it occupies these areas of Africa, which are more or less the Sub-Saharan regions of Africa, and they push back haplogroup A in more or less this region. You see that E is less present, and in this region, and you see that E is less present, and again it's more present where it had most contact with Mediterranean, Western Europe, and with the Middle East and Eastern Asia. As said before, this is occupied by C. What I will prove later is that E is not a descendant from A nor from B, it's a descendant from D, and in some way you see an indication right here, it's E, but here it's mentioned as if it comes from the group DE, which is a construction of consensus. And as you see, they are not the basal Africans or whatever, they are the basal Eurasians, ancestral Western Eurasians. And they're mentioning a migration into Africa 75,000 years BC. So in some way you see that it is kind of a confirmation of what I said. And like they almost or really claim that it comes from DE, D was before O, so it comes from this region or from where D and O come from, which is Australia, and Australia comes from South America. As I said, this was a non-scripted video. In this image, which are the dominant haplogroups, in fact, Y-DNA dominant haplogroups all over the world today, I showed this other route out of the Americas that, let's say, brings Q and hybrids of Q to Australia. It's C, I mentioned, it's a descendant of Q. C descendant of Q, it comes up, there's a current here. It's the North Pacific gyre, makes this movement. So while R went to the North Atlantic gyre, it came into Western Europe and Western Eurasia by the North Atlantic gyre. This is best shown in another map. This North Atlantic gyre is best shown in this map. In this map, the Americas are to the left and Eurasia is to the right, Australia as well. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.